the Second Amendment's 27 words, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed, have sparked fierce debate for centuries. These words, written over 200 years ago, continue to resonate and divide Americans, fueling passionate arguments about their true meaning and intent. For some, the amendment stands as a fundamental guarantee of personal liberty and self-defense, a safeguard against tyranny, and a symbol of American independence. For others, it's a relic of a bygone era, originally tied to the need for state militias rather than individual gun ownership in modern society. This tension has shaped not only American law, but also the nation's culture and identity, fueling ongoing arguments about the proper scope and limits of gun rights. The debate is not just legal, it's deeply personal, touching on questions of safety, freedom, and the very fabric of American life. Drafted in a revolutionary era, the amendment reflected the founders' deep distrust of standing armies and a reliance on citizen militias for defense. In those early days, the right to bear arms was seen as essential to the security of a free state and a check against potential government overreach. Over time, the focus of the Second Amendment shifted from collective defense to individual rights. This evolution culminated in the Supreme Court's landmark 2008 Heller decision, which affirmed that the Constitution protects an individual's right to possess firearms for self-defense at home, a ruling that fundamentally changed the legal landscape. But Heller didn't end the debate. It raised new questions about where and how guns can be carried, especially outside the home. The ruling left unresolved issues about public carry, concealed weapons, and the extent to which states can regulate firearms in public spaces. Legal challenges have since targeted public carry laws and restrictions on certain firearms, forcing courts to continually balance individual rights with the need for public safety. Each new case brings fresh arguments and interpretations, keeping the debate alive in courtrooms and communities across the country. The Supreme Court's decision to hear Woolford v. Lopez, a case challenging Hawaii's restrictive gun law, marks the latest chapter in this ongoing saga. The case has drawn national attention, as its outcome could set a precedent for how far states can go in regulating firearms. At stake is a critical question: whether the right to carry a firearm for self-defense can be limited by state regulations, especially on private property that is open to the public. The answer could affect not just Hawaii, but the entire nation. The outcome will shape the future of gun regulation and Second Amendment rights across the nation, influencing laws, policies, and the daily lives of millions of Americans for years to come. Woolford v. Lopez began in Hawaii, a place often celebrated for its natural beauty and unique culture, but also recognized for its particularly strict approach to gun control. For years, Hawaii has stood out as one of the most restrictive states in the nation when it comes to firearms, with laws designed to keep guns out of public spaces and off the streets. In 2023, the state legislature passed a sweeping new law in direct response to the Supreme Court's Bruin decision, which had expanded public carry rights across the country and forced states to reconsider their regulations. While the law technically allowed for concealed carry permits, it imposed a unique restriction. It became a crime to bring a handgun onto any private property open to the public, unless the property owner posted a sign explicitly allowing firearms. This default ban covered nearly all public-facing businesses, shops, restaurants, hotels, and more, making it virtually impossible for permit holders to carry guns as part of their daily routines or errands. The law also created a long list of sensitive places where firearms were strictly prohibited, including public parks, banks, government buildings, and other commonly visited locations. In response, 3 Maui residents, along with the Hawaii Firearms Coalition, filed a lawsuit, arguing that the law rendered their right to carry meaningless and left them defenseless in most public settings. They claimed Hawaii's law was a deliberate attempt to sidestep the Supreme Court's ruling in Bruin, effectively undermining the intent of the decision. By making public carry legal in theory but nearly impossible in practice, the state, they argued, had nullified the constitutional right to bear arms for self-defense outside the home. The lawsuit set up a direct confrontation over the limits of state power, the reach of the Second Amendment, and the balance between public safety and individual rights. The case quickly became a national flashpoint, drawing attention from gun rights advocates, legal scholars, and policymakers across the country. Now, with the Supreme Court poised to weigh in, the nation waits to see whether Hawaii's approach to gun regulation will stand, or be struck down as unconstitutional. The challengers argue that Hawaii's law fundamentally undermines the Second Amendment right to carry a firearm in public for self-defense, a right that was recently reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in the landmark Bruin decision. They claim the law's restrictions go far beyond what the Constitution allows. Because most businesses do not post signs explicitly allowing firearms, permit holders are effectively barred from entering nearly all private establishments while armed. This, the challengers say, turns the right to carry into little more than a hollow promise, as it leaves law-abiding citizens with virtually nowhere to go. The challengers invoke Bruin's historical test, which requires that modern gun regulations be consistent with the nation's historical tradition at the time the Second Amendment was ratified. They argue that Hawaii's law fails this test. According to their research, history shows that people were generally allowed to carry firearms on private property unless the owner specifically objected. Hawaii's law, however, flips this tradition on its head by requiring explicit permission from property owners before carrying a firearm. The challengers maintain that there is no historical precedent for such a sweeping and categorical ban. In their view, the law's practical effect is to confine the exercise of gun rights to public streets and sidewalks, stripping away meaningful self-defense options in most everyday settings. This, they claim, not only undermines the core purpose of self-defense, but also directly contradicts the Supreme Court's intent in the Bruin decision, which emphasized the importance of public carry rights. Their case rests on two main points. First, that the law is a practical nullification of the right to carry in public, and second, that it is inconsistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. They emphasize that the Second Amendment was never intended to allow states to impose such broad restrictions, and that Hawaii's law stands alone in its severity. Ultimately, the challengers urge the Supreme Court to strike down Hawaii's law as unconstitutional, arguing that it violates both the letter and the spirit of the Second Amendment. Hawaii defends its law by emphasizing property rights and public safety. The state argues the Second Amendment doesn't grant a right to carry guns onto private property without the owner's consent. The law, they say, respects property owners' autonomy and is rooted in Hawaii's long tradition of firearm regulation. Hawaii contends its approach balances gun rights with the need to protect residents and visitors in a densely populated, tourism-driven state. The law doesn't ban public carry outright. Permits are available, but gives property owners control. If a business wants to allow guns, it can post a sign. Otherwise, firearms are presumed banned. Hawaii frames this as a constitutional compromise that honors both the Second Amendment and property rights. Woolford v. Lopez unfolds in the wake of the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision, which struck down restrictive public carry laws and set a new standard for gun regulation. Bruin replaced balancing tests with a strict historical approach. Modern gun laws must have clear analogs from the founding era. This history-based test has confused lower courts, leading to conflicting rulings and a patchwork of standards nationwide. Woolford v. Lopez asked the Supreme Court to clarify how the Bruin test applies, especially to laws about guns on private property open to the public. Both sides present competing historical narratives, seeking to shape the court's interpretation. The decision will not only determine Hawaii's law, but also guide lower courts on applying the demanding historical analysis Bruin requires. The case is a chance for the Supreme Court to refine its precedent and bring consistency to Second Amendment law. The stakes extend far beyond Hawaii. Woolford v. Lopez's path to the Supreme Court was marked by sharp disagreement in the lower courts. Initially, a federal judge blocked Hawaii's law, finding no historical tradition for such a sweeping ban. But the Ninth Circuit reversed, upholding most of the law, and arguing that the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee a right to carry guns on private property against the owner's wishes. The majority saw Hawaii's law as a valid balance between gun rights and property rights. Judge Van Dyke's dissent accused the majority of misreading Bruin and relegating the Second Amendment to a second-class right. He argued the law effectively nullified public carry for millions of Hawaiians. The Ninth Circuit's ruling clashed with an East Coast court that struck down a similar law, creating a circuit split. This split made Supreme Court review almost inevitable, as the justices seek to unify federal law. The stage was set for a major constitutional showdown. The Supreme Court's ruling in Woolford v. Lopez will have national consequences. Several states, including New York, California, and New Jersey, have similar laws restricting guns on private property open to the public. If the court strikes down Hawaii's law, it could invalidate these measures and expand where licensed individuals can carry firearms. A ruling upholding the law would affirm states' authority to regulate guns on private property, empowering business owners to decide. Either way, the decision will clarify how the Bruin historical test applies and shape the next generation of Second Amendment cases. Lower courts, lawmakers, and citizens are watching closely for guidance. The outcome will define the boundaries of gun rights and regulation for years to come. Woolford v. Lopez captures the heart of America's gun debate, balancing individual rights with public safety and property rights. Supporters of gun rights argue that self-defense means little if it can't be exercised in public. Opponents say society needs reasonable limits, and property owners should control their premises. The Supreme Court must craft a principle that honors both the right to bear arms and the state's power to regulate for the common good. Their decision will set a new standard for courts and lawmakers nationwide. The debate over guns is a reflection of America's ongoing struggle to define freedom, risk, and responsibility. Woolford v. Lopez is a pivotal moment in that conversation, one that will echo for generations.